If you think Mozart is boring, there's a very good chance you're listening in the wrong way. And I don't mean that as an insult. If you're looking for big impact, lots of emotion, or a huge sound, Mozart, by comparison, can seem like nothing is happening. So, how could it be that one of the world's most famous composers leaves some people completely unmoved? See, a lot of us who listen to music, even classical music lovers, have now been sort of trained or conditioned to listen for the dramatic payoff, the high impact, the climax. But Mozart's music doesn't always work that way. Think of movie music, blockbusters, music that enhances the intensity of the moment. The thing that we have to understand first about Mozart is that he's writing in the classical style. And the one word that comes to mind with classical music is balance. There's also simplicity, beauty in the shape of the form, beauty in the shape of the line. If you compare that to composers like Bach, which have high emotion that comes out of the intensity of the counterpoint, or the emotion of the Romantic period, which is sometimes just laid right out on the table for you by composers like Tchaikovsky and Wagner and Richard Strauss, Mozart sits in the middle. What they're looking for is something completely different in the classical period than the Baroque or in the Romantic period. In the Romantic period, the composer often is the focus of the music themselves, or some dramatic or incredible scene. But in the classical period, the composer might be undergoing a really difficult time in their lives, but they'll still write a beautiful, balanced little piece of music. The music wasn't there to reflect the emotions that they were feeling in their lives, with the exception possibly of opera. And if you say, but there are Romantic period composers that wrote very sparsely, for example, Chopin mostly wrote for solo piano. But even there, the writing is more lush. The harmonies are more chromatic, more complex. With Mozart, it's a lot more simply laid out, but it's deceptively simple. For example, we think of balanced phrases as 4 plus 4, 6 plus 6. But Mozart will often throw in asymmetrical phrases into the mix, but the difference is you will not perceive them as asymmetrical. But sometimes that deceptive simplicity to someone who is used to something more lush can just sound like nothing's happening. But trust me, there's a lot going on. And if you don't believe me, try editing a Mozart composition. See if you can make it better. One of two things will happen. Either you will destroy the beauty of what Mozart wrote, or you'll end up with something totally different, which will sound like you. And there's nothing wrong with that, but now it's not Mozart. Another problem is that if you're expecting the emotional impact or immediacy of the Romantics, you may not get that with Mozart, with, again, the exception of his opera. If you listen to some of his instrumental music, he often likes to go for not only that balance that I talked about, but even sometimes telling an inside joke or something that seems very subtle. And so if you don't get the joke or you don't get his phrasing, it can just sound overly polite. But once you learn to tune your inner ear into what Mozart's doing, you'll understand all the gestures, all the phrases, even small things like how a turn works, how a trill works, how a scale is different this time from last time. And those subtleties are what make his music incomprehensibly beautiful. And I'll admit here that until age 30, I admired Mozart but didn't like him so much. It took me that long to understand him. So I would say Mozart's music sometimes just takes a little patience. So how do we learn to love Mozart if you don't already? For me, the main thing is the singable line. Even when Mozart's not writing music for the voice, for opera, his music is often singable. It's often a beautiful melody. You can contrast that even to other classical composers like Haydn. Haydn can write a melody like that, but often Haydn's instrumental music is more instrumental, quirky, or it fits the instrument, or it shows the instrument off. Mozart tends to like to write a melody, followed by another melody, followed by another melody. They just pour out of him like honey out of a jar. Listen for that phrase structure, where the melody rises and falls, where the harmonies are leading. Sometimes he'll lead you to a harmony, you think you're going there, and you'll get a deceptive cadence and you'll turn off in another direction. These little tracks around his music world are the subtle delights you can look forward to in Mozart's music. And if we go back to that experiment that I hope you'll try, rewriting some of Mozart's music, I think you'll find the reason it's so hard to do is that every note, every phrase has its place. There's an inevitability about the music, a satisfaction when it finally does cadence or when it modulates and when modulates back. It's very hard to rewrite Mozart because his logic, his musical logic, and his chord progressions just make so much sense. But even when you understand that, even when you're looking for that, sometimes you just don't find it. And that's the other reason Mozart can sound boring. I'm going to be honest here, because sometimes performers, even great performers, just don't know how to perform Mozart. And if you're a performer, you know that Mozart actually is more difficult to perform than romantic composers like Rachmaninoff or Chopin. On the surface, it seems like Mozart would be easier, but there's nowhere to hide with him. You can't just put the pedal down if you're a pianist. There's no thick textures to hide. It's all pure. And if you get any gesture wrong, even if you miss a note, it's really, really noticeable with Mozart. So not only do you have to perform perfectly and get every note right, get every little touch right, every gesture, every trill clean, every phrase very clear, but you have to enliven everything with those gestures and with the direction that Mozart is trying to indicate to the audience. Get one or two of those things wrong, and it will fall flat. It'll sound like you're just banging out the notes. So when a colleague or a student of mine says, I listened to this Mozart piece and it was really boring, I always say, can you tell me which one it was? Because I want to hear it for myself. And guess what? A lot of the times, they're not wrong, but it's often because of the performance itself. It's because the performer either misunderstood what Mozart was trying to say, or sometimes because they were trying to turn it into a romantic piece, which it just isn't. On the surface, Mozart can look and even sound simple, but what you find is that every phrase, every turn, every twist, every shape of the melody, every gesture is inevitable. It belongs where it belongs, and that's what makes Mozart perfect. But I want to know what you think. Do you find Mozart boring, or do you love Mozart? Let me know why in the comments below. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.